Being born in the West and being schooled in the West means that you will be taught according to a Western grand narrative. What is that? A grand narrative is the teaching of all things related to history, society, and morality, taught from a state-approved perspective. Let me explain what I mean with a couple of examples, 2 examples. We learnt about the British Empire, how large and powerful it was, how glorious Great Britain was, leading the world through the Industrial Revolution. Magnificent. It was only later, however, I learned using my own initiative, schools won't go this far, you see, how damaging colonialism was to those who were colonized, to the natives, wherever they were. The British Empire was powerful, but their industrial revolution was carried out on the strained and malnourished bodies of numberless men and women who toiled in the extraction-based economic model of British India. And that's just one example of a colony. Britain had many more. Why do I mention India then? Because India was the jewel in the British imperial crown, its most populous, most resource and potential rich colony. We learnt about Winston Churchill. What a legendary man he was, we were told. To have led Britain through the Second World War, providing heroic opposition to the fascist regime of Germany at the time. But this is also Churchill. Quote, "I hate Indians. They are a beastly people with a beastly religion." End quote. He said this in 1942. Churchill, who was in power when an estimated 4 million people died in British-controlled India. This is the same Churchill. The extraction economic model the British used in India did not prioritize the lives of the natives of the land. No surprise there, of course. It prioritized resource extraction to fuel the prosperity and industrialization of the British homeland. These fair isles that I'm now in, ironically. 4 million people died, guys. 4 million people in what is now known as the Bengal famine. And apparently Churchill and the British government, the brightest light on earth at the time, leading the industrial and technological revolution of the age in the Victorian era. That part, of course, we're taught about. But apparently all they could do is sit by and watch 4 million people die. Of course, cannot help and will not help are 2 different things. Afterwards, Churchill has been quoted as blaming the famine on the fact Indians were, quote, breeding like rabbits, end quote. He is noted as asking how Mahatma Gandhi was still alive if the shortages of food were so bad. British India and Churchill are just 2 examples. Well, British India, Churchill, and Empire. They're just 2 examples that I've mentioned here very briefly. There are many more. New examples are made even today. Britain is apparently a leading nation in the enlightened West even now. But just this year we learnt that Britain is working closely with the State of Israel as it carries out its genocide in Gaza. I'm not anti-Britain, by the way. I'm just pro-truth, pro-information. And if anyone calls me anti-British or anti-Britain, I would respond by saying that I'm not making things up. And you agree with that, right? I'm stating accurately British history. If you call that anti-British, what you're saying is that you want to hide and bury British history. You want to hide and bury the truth, making you pro-propaganda. I and all my fellow British nationals have been raised and schooled with the British grand narrative in mind. But I believe we are all better off with an expanded, unbiased understanding of how things are and how things were. The truth, not the spin. Where mistakes were made by the state, admission, not omission. Progress is when you learn from your mistakes, and future generations cannot learn if you bury your sins and re-engineer the narrative to avoid the shame, to distort reality. Accept your mistakes, apologize, and move on, move upwards, onwards and upwards.